The man left his infertile wife for his boss, and when he returned 5 years later to claim his inheritance, he saw twins. The silence in my Manhattan apartment was so loud it felt like a ringing in my ears. It was a designer silence, curated and expensive, the kind that costs a fortune in soundproofing and double-paned glass 40 floors above the city. 5 years. It had been 5 years since I'd traded the messy, unpredictable sounds of a life for this sterile hush. My reflection stared back at me from the floor-to-ceiling window. Ethan, 40 years old, senior VP, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that felt more like a uniform than clothing. The city lights blurred into a glittering tapestry below, but I felt none of its energy. I just felt polished down to a smooth, cold stone. This apartment, all chrome and white leather, was Victoria's world. I just lived in it. At this very moment, she was in the master suite, her voice a clipped metronome on a conference call that had started before sunrise. Victoria, my boss, my partner, the woman I had chosen. She was in her 50s, a force of nature carved from granite, with a mind that moved like a stock ticker and a heart that, I was fairly certain, didn't beat so much as it calculated. Our relationship was a merger, a strategic alliance. We looked good on paper. In person, the space between us was as cold and wide as the marble island in our kitchen. A sudden, phantom scent of rain on hot asphalt and lavender-scented laundry soap hit me, a ghost from another life. It was all it took. The chrome and glass dissolved, and I was falling backwards through time. I'm back in our little house in Evanston, the Chicago suburb we'd called home. It's 5 years ago, but the memory is so sharp it could cut glass. The air is thick with a grief that has no sound. Chloe is sitting on the worn-in softness of our old sofa, the one we bought at a flea market and hauled home in a rented U-Haul. Her hands are clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. She's staring at a spot on the hardwood floor, the very spot where our golden retriever Sam used to sleep before he passed. She isn't crying. It's worse than crying. It's as if all the color has been vacuumed out of her, leaving behind a pale, fragile shell. The doctor's voice from an hour ago is still echoing in my brain. Clinical. Final. No viable follicles remaining. At this point, we have to consider all options exhausted. He called it conclusively infertile. A verdict. A life sentence. It was the final nail in the coffin of our fourth and last IVF attempt. All the hope, the injections, the schedules, the whispered prayers in the dark, all of it had amounted to this: an empty room, an empty future. I stood by the mantelpiece looking at the photos. Us on our wedding day. Us hiking in Colorado. Us, always us, a couple, but never a family. And in that moment, something inside me, a wire I'd been holding taut for years, just snapped. "I can't do this anymore, Chloe," I said. My voice was level, detached. I was already disconnecting. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, usually the color of warm honey, were dull and lost. "Do what? We'll look at adoption. We'll figure it out, Ethan. We always do." "No," I said, the word coming out colder than I intended. "That's not what I want." The cruelty of it was a physical thing, a taste of metal in my mouth. "I want a real family, Chloe, biological children, a legacy, not a project." The word project landed between us like a grenade. I saw the impact in her eyes, a shattering of 1,000 tiny pieces. She actually flinched, a small, barely perceptible recoil, as if I'd physically struck her. "A project?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "After everything, you think this was a project?" But I was already gone, my mind miles away, finalizing a decision I'd been secretly nurturing for months. The ambition I'd mistaken for love was calling to me. "I'm leaving," I said, the confession feeling less like a betrayal and more like a business declaration. "I'm moving to New York. Victoria, she's offered me a senior VP position, a real future." I didn't have to say the rest. Her gasp was one of dawning, horrified understanding. Victoria wasn't just my boss. I was leaving my infertile wife for the powerful woman who could give me the world, even if she couldn't give me a child. For me, at that moment, The career was legacy enough. I turned and walked out, the sound of her single, broken sob following me down the hallway. I never looked back. The shrill, unfamiliar ringtone of my burner phone yanked me back to the present. I kept it for calls I didn't want Victoria's executive assistant screening. I glanced at the screen. A Chicago area code. I answered, my voice clipped with New York impatience. "This is Ethan." "Mr. Hayes," a dry, reedy voice said. "This is Jonathan Fields, from the law offices of Fields, Stern, and Associates. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. I was your father's attorney. He passed away peacefully 2 nights ago." The words floated in the silent apartment, feeling foreign and unreal. My father and I had been estranged for years, a chasm of unspoken resentments between us ever since I left Chloe. His silence on the matter had been its own form of judgment. I felt a brief, dull ache, more like a phantom limb than true grief. "I see," I managed. "I am the executor of his will," the lawyer continued, "and its contents are quite specific. Your father's estate is substantial. It includes the family home in Evanston and a portfolio valued at several $1,000,000. My breath caught. Several million. The numbers began to spin in my head, a beautiful, mesmerizing dance. This wasn't just money. This was an escape pod, a golden parachute from Victoria, from the relentless pressure of my job, from this entire hollow life I had so carefully constructed. "There is, however, a stipulation," Mr. Fields added, his tone unwavering. "To claim your inheritance, you are required to return to Chicago and handle the disposition of the estate in person. All documents must be signed here, under my supervision." A flare of annoyance shot through me. Of course there was a catch, my father, controlling things even from the grave. Still, it was a small price. A short flight, a few signatures, and I'd be free. I'd liquidate everything, the house, the stocks, all of it, and build a new life, a real one this time, on my own terms. "I understand," I said, my mind already racing. "I'll book a flight immediately." As I hung up, I pictured the house. I assumed Chloe had moved out years ago. The house would be empty, dusty, a time capsule of a life I'd discarded. It was just a property now, an asset to be liquidated. Annoyed, but resolute, I pulled out my laptop. A first-class ticket to O'Hare, a quick trip in and out. This was just a business transaction, and I was, above all else, a businessman. It never once occurred to me that the past I had so ruthlessly buried wasn't dead at all. It was just waiting for me. The Uber from O'Hare to my old neighborhood in Evanston felt like a time machine I hadn't asked to ride in. Every street sign, every familiar oak tree, was a ghost from a life I'd deliberately torched. The air, thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and Lake Michigan, was a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled chill of my New York apartment. Victoria had sneered when I told her I had to go back. "Just have the lawyers handle it, Ethan," she'd said, not even looking up from her tablet. "Liquidate and come home." But my father, ever the traditionalist, had made it ironclad in his will. I had to show up in person to claim what was mine. I figured it was one last power play from beyond the grave, a final attempt to make me confront the town I'd fled. Fine, I could play the part of the dutiful son for a couple of days to secure a multi-million-dollar exit strategy. As the car pulled up to the curb, a knot of annoyance tightened in my stomach. A dark blue Honda CR-V was parked in the driveway. My driveway. I paid the driver, my mind racing through possibilities. A neighbor? A realtor my dad had hired before he passed? I told myself it was a minor inconvenience. I'd just knock, explain the situation, and have them move. I assumed Chloe was long gone, probably remarried and living a new life somewhere in another state. The house was supposed to be empty, a silent but valuable monument to my past. The front door was locked. I fumbled for the old spare key that I knew used to be under the loose brick by the porch steps, but it wasn't there. Frustration pricked at me. This was already more complicated than it needed to be. I heard a faint, rhythmic squeaking sound coming from the backyard, followed by a peal of childish laughter. Drawn by the noise, I walked around the side of the house, my expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel path. And then I froze. The backyard, my backyard, was a scene from a life that was never supposed to exist. There was a brand new swing set, the kind you see in suburban catalogs, erected right where my dad's old vegetable garden used to be. And pushing the swings was Chloe. My Chloe. But she wasn't the shattered, weeping woman I'd left standing in our kitchen 5 years ago. This Chloe was vibrant. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a faded t-shirt. She looked happy, healthy, and a million miles away from the person I remembered. On the swings were 2 small children, a boy and a girl, their legs kicking with joy. "Higher, Mommy, higher!" the little girl squealed. "Okay, Mia, hold on tight," Chloe laughed, giving the swing a gentle push. The world tilted. I must have made a sound, a scuff of my shoe, because Chloe's head snapped in my direction. The laughter died on her lips. Her face went blank, then hardened into a mask of cold composure. For a second, a long, agonizing second, we just stared at each other across the lawn. "Ethan," she said. Her voice wasn't surprised, or angry, or sad. It was flat, the voice you use for a stranger who's knocked on the wrong door. The kids stopped pumping their legs, their little faces turning to follow their mother's gaze. "What are you doing here, Chloe?" I managed, my voice sounding harsh even to my own ears. This is my father's house." She gave me a thin, humorless smile. She walked over to the kids, placing a protective hand on each of their shoulders. "Leo, Mia, this is someone your grandpa knew." Then, looking directly at me, she said, "They're my kids." My mind went into overdrive, scrambling for a logical explanation. Her kids. Adopted, obviously. It had to be. Our last IVF cycle was a catastrophic failure. The doctor's words still echoed in my memory. "I'm so sorry, but it's just not going to happen." So she adopted. Okay, but why was she here? Was she squatting? Living here with my dad's permission? The anger started to bubble up, hot and swift. I had come for a clean, simple transaction. And instead, I'd walked into a domestic drama. Obstacles, that's all they were. I did the math in my head, a cold, corporate calculation. I left in May, 5 years ago. These kids looked 4 at most. The timeline didn't work. It couldn't. A wave of relief, bizarre and unsettling, washed over me. They weren't mine. That confirmation allowed the anger to fully take root. The first thing I did the next morning was call my father's attorney and begin the formal process of executing the will and taking possession of the property. I treated Chloe with a cold, formal distance, like a tenant I was legally obligated to evict. But then the details started, tiny, insignificant things that were like splinters under my skin. A few days later, I was in the kitchen making a cup of coffee when the kids ran in, chasing each other. The boy, Leo, skidded to a halt, his brown hair flopping over his eyes. He impatiently swiped it back, but one stubborn piece right at his hairline refused to lie flat, springing back up in a perfect, defiant cowlick. My heart skipped a beat. I stood there, coffee mug halfway to my mouth, staring. It was my cowlick, the exact same one my mom used to laugh about, the one I still wrestled with every morning in the mirror. I told myself it was a coincidence, a ridiculous, meaningless coincidence. A day or two after that, Chloe's friend, a neighbor I vaguely recognized, stopped by. She was cooing over the kids on the front porch. I was heading out to my rental car, trying to ignore them, when I overheard the neighbor say, "He's just the spitting image of his dad, Chloe. And Mia, too. Gosh, they look more like their father every day." I saw Chloe stiffen. "They take after my side of the family," she said quickly, her voice tight, before abruptly changing the subject to the weather. I got in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Her denial was too fast, too defensive. The splinter of doubt dug a little deeper. Driven by a gnawing feeling I refused to name, I started snooping. I felt low doing it, but I couldn't help myself. I started with the fridge, that classic bulletin board of family life. It was covered in crayon drawings. One, in particular, caught my eye. It was a typical stick figure family portrait. There was a figure labeled Mommy, and next to her, holding a tiny baby in each arm, was a larger stick figure with a halo of messy gray hair, labeled Grandpa, my father. Why was my father in a drawing holding these children as newborns? If she'd adopted them after I left, Why would he be part of that picture? The narrative I had constructed, the one where she was an ungrateful squatter, was beginning to have serious holes. My search grew more frantic. The house was now a puzzle I had to solve, and the prize was no longer just the money, it was the truth. My father's old study, which I'd planned to clear out, became my focus. Most of it was just old books and financial papers, but in his desk, the bottom right drawer was locked. I remembered that drawer. It was where he kept important, personal things. After a half hour of searching, I found a small key taped to the underside of the desk. My hands were trembling slightly as I unlocked it. Inside, nestled beneath old tax returns, was a thick, leather-bound photo album. It wasn't one of my mother's old ones. This was new. I opened it. The first photo knocked the air from my lungs. It was Chloe, standing in this very backyard, cradling a small, unmistakable baby bump. She was glowing. The date stamp on the bottom of the photo read, July 20th, 5 years ago, 2 months after I had walked out. The next page showed her further along, and the next and the next. It was a complete, meticulous record of a pregnancy I was told was impossible. I slammed the album shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stormed out of the study and found her in the living room, folding laundry, the kids playing quietly on the floor with blocks. I didn't raise my voice. I couldn't. I was too breathless. The photos, I said, my voice a ragged whisper. In Dad's desk, you were pregnant. Chloe didn't even look at me. She just kept folding a tiny t-shirt with methodical, infuriating calm. Finally, she placed the folded shirt on the pile and met my gaze. Her eyes were like ice chips. You gave up the right to ask questions about my life 5 years ago, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Focus on your money, Ethan. It's what you're good at. Her defiance, the cool way she threw my own ugly priorities back in my face, didn't extinguish the fire. It poured gasoline on it. This was no longer about an inheritance. My entire life, the one I had built and the one I had destroyed, suddenly felt like a lie. All I knew was that I was standing in a house full of secrets, and I would tear it apart, piece by piece, if that's what it took to find the truth. Sleep wasn't coming anymore. The old house in Evanston, which I'd once seen as nothing more than a high-value asset on a spreadsheet, had transformed into a house of whispers. Every creak of the floorboards at night sounded like a question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Leo's cowlick, a perfect swirl of dark hair right on his forehead, an exact mirror of the one I've spent my entire adult life trying to tame with expensive styling products. Mia's birthmark, a tiny coffee-colored splash on the inside of her wrist, a ghost of the same mark my own mother used to touch for good luck. These weren't just details, they were brandings, marks of a lineage I thought I had severed. The neighbor's words played on a loop in my head. They look more like their father every day. And Chloe's reaction, that swift, panicked change of subject, was more damning than any confession. My greed, the cold, hard ambition that had driven me here from New York, was evaporating. It was being replaced by something hotter, something more corrosive, a frantic, clawing obsession. The child's drawing on the fridge felt like a piece of evidence in a trial I didn't understand. A stick figure labeled Grandpa, his hand on a baby's head. My father. Why was he in this new family portrait and I wasn't? My days were spent in a tense, silent war with Chloe. I'd have my lawyer on the phone, discussing eviction notices and property rights, then hang up and walk into the kitchen to see her making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for 2 little kids who might be mine. The cognitive dissonance was tearing me apart. Chloe treated me like a ghost, a necessary evil she had to endure until the paperwork was signed. Her coldness was a wall, but I could see the cracks. I could see the flicker of 5-year-old pain in her eyes whenever I got too close to the kids. My obsession finally found a target. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't think, I couldn't focus on liquidating the stocks my father had left. All I could see were 2 small faces. Late one night, sitting at my father's old desk, the one where I found the photo album of a pregnant Chloe, an idea sparked. A desperate, sleazy idea born from years of corporate maneuvering. It was ugly, but I didn't care. I needed the truth more than I needed to be a good person. The next morning, my heart hammering against my ribs, I called the fertility clinic. The number was still saved in my phone, a relic from a life I'd torched. When a polite receptionist answered, I shifted into my VP mode, calm, authoritative, and utterly full of it. "Good morning," I said, my voice smoother than I felt. "My name is Ethan Adams. I'm the executor of the estate for the late Daniel Adams." I paused, letting the formal titles sink in. "I'm in the process of closing out his affairs, and we've come across some outstanding medical records we need for a final insurance reconciliation. Specifically, we need the complete file for his daughter-in-law, Chloe Adams, from approximately 5 years ago." There was a moment of silence, then the tapping of a keyboard. "Sir, due to HIPAA privacy laws, I can't release patient records to a third party." "I understand completely," I said, my voice turning cooler, firmer. "However, Mr. Adams's insurance policy had certain clauses relating to family medical procedures. As the executor, I have a legal fiduciary duty to settle his account. The estate cannot be closed without this documentation. We can get lawyers involved, of course, but I'm trying to handle this quickly and quietly for everyone's sake." I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I was banking on a low-level employee not wanting to escalate a problem to their superiors, especially when it involved lawyers and a deceased person's estate. "Let me see what I can do," she said finally. "What's the best email for you?" I gave her my slick New York email address and hung up, my hand trembling slightly. For the next hour, I paced the length of the guest room, checking my phone every 30 seconds. Then it came. A single email with the subject line, "Patient Records, Adams C." Attached was a password-protected PDF. They'd sent the password in a separate text. My fingers felt clumsy as I typed it in. The file opened. Page after page of clinical notes, hormone levels, ultrasound measurements, the cold, scientific language of our desperate attempts to build a family. I scrolled past the failures, the negative results, the notes of unsuccessful cycle. My stomach twisted with the memory of that pain. I was scrolling faster and faster, looking for, I didn't even know what, a note about adoption, a mention of a sperm donor, anything to make it make sense. And then I saw it. The very last entry, the final page. It was dated 2 weeks after the day I walked out. 2 weeks after I'd stood in our living room and told her she wasn't enough. Patient, Chloe Adams. Procedure, single embryo transfer, cryopreserved. Final of cycle. Status, successful. Note, viable intrauterine pregnancy confirmed via ultrasound. Gestational sac and yolk sac identified. Fetal heartbeat detected. The words blurred. I read them again and again. The date, October 18th. I had left her on October 4th. The realization didn't come in a wave. It hit me like a physical blow, a fist to the gut that knocked all the air from my lungs. The room went silent. The document in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I printed it, the whirring of the machine sounding like a siren in the dead quiet of the house. I was standing, but I couldn't feel my legs. I stormed out of the room, the single sheet of paper shaking in my hand. I found Chloe in the living room, picking up stray building blocks while Leo and Mia watched a cartoon on the TV. I didn't yell. I couldn't. My voice was gone, lost somewhere in the black hole that had just opened up in my chest. I stopped in front of her and just held out the paper. She looked from my face to the document, and the color drained from hers. Her mask of icy composure didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. My voice was a ragged whisper. "This last embryo, you were pregnant? You were pregnant when I left." Her breath hitched, and the first tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Then another. She sank onto the sofa as if her legs had given out, her whole body trembling. "Yes," she choked out, the word thick with 5 years of unshed grief. "I tried to call you, Ethan," she said, her voice cracking open, raw and full of agony. "I called you a dozen times. You sent every call to voicemail. Then you sent that text." She looked me dead in the eye, and I could see the moment replaying for her, the final twist of the knife. "You wrote, 'I need a clean break, Chloe. Don't contact me again.' A clean break." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I was alone. I was devastated. I was pregnant with the baby we had tried for years to have, and you threw me away for a promotion." Her tears were flowing freely now. I didn't know what to do, so I called the one person I thought might still have a soul, your father. She took a shaky breath. He drove down from Evanston that same day. When I told him, I've never seen a man so disgusted. Not with me, with you. He swore he would help me. He made me promise to let him be there. He was at every doctor's appointment. He was there when we found out the embryo had split, that it was twins. He held my hand in the delivery room, Ethan. Her voice dropped, filled with a righteous anger that burned through her tears. She stood up, her small frame radiating a strength I had never seen before. "You said you wanted a legacy. You said you wanted a real family, not a project. So I did it without you. Your father changed his will to make sure we would be safe. That the kids would have this house, that they would be provided for. He cut you out of his life that day, not just his will." She gestured toward the TV, where Leo and Mia were laughing, oblivious. "They are not a project, Ethan. They are my entire life. They are the beautiful, incredible children you threw away." The words hung in the air, heavier than any silence I had ever known. "They are the children you threw away." Chloe's voice, though trembling, was a steel blade that severed the last thread of the reality I had constructed for myself. The neat, clean world of a man who had made a tough but necessary choice for his future. It all shattered into a million pieces. I just stood there in the living room, the printout from the clinic still clutched in my hand, the paper limp and useless. My throat was dry, my chest a hollow cavern where my heart used to be. I looked past Chloe's tear-streaked face to the two small figures huddled by the doorway, peeking out at the scene. Leo and Mia, my son and daughter. The knowledge didn't just sink in, it detonated inside my soul. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't a detail to be analyzed or a timeline to be questioned. It was a fact, as real as the floor beneath my feet, and the crushing weight of shame pressing down on my shoulders. I saw them, truly saw them, for the first time. Leo's serious little face, his dark hair falling over his forehead with that stubborn cowlick. A perfect mirror of my own boyhood photos. Mia's wide, curious eyes, and the tiny, clover-shaped smudge on her wrist that I now knew was my mother's birthmark, passed down through me, to her. They were my legacy, the dynasty I'd so arrogantly demanded. The excuse I had used to gut my own life had been here all along, growing up in the house I'd abandoned, nurtured by the woman I had broken. A profound, suffocating sense of loss washed over me. It was a grief for a life I had never known I'd lost. 5 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. 5 years of being a father that I had traded for sterile glass-walled offices and a transactional relationship that had all the warmth of a corporate merger. The ambition that had felt so vital and important now seemed like a cheap, pathetic con I had played on myself. The next 24 hours were a blur of muted agony. I stayed in the guest room, the same one my father had kept for me since I was a teenager. The air in the house was thick with the weight of everything unsaid. I'd catch glimpses of them. I'd hear their laughter from the backyard, a sound that was simultaneously the sweetest and most painful thing I'd ever heard. I made clumsy, pathetic attempts to bridge the 5-year chasm I had created. I saw Leo in the den meticulously lining up his toy cars on the rug. I knelt down, my joints cracking. "Hey, bud," I said, my voice sounding foreign and rough. "That's a cool red truck you've got there." He froze, his little hand hovering over a blue sedan. He looked up at me with wide, uncertain eyes before scrambling to his feet and running to Chloe, who was folding laundry on the couch. He buried his face in her side, and she wrapped a protective arm around him, her gaze on me, cold and unyielding. It wasn't hostile, but it was a clear boundary, an electrified fence. Later, I saw Mia's drawing of Grandpa on the fridge. I found her coloring at the kitchen table. "I saw your art on the fridge," I said softly, trying to keep my tone light. "You're a really good artist, Mia." She just stared at me, then slid off her chair and padded over to Chloe, taking refuge behind her mother's legs. Chloe didn't say a word. She just stroked Mia's hair, her presence a silent, impenetrable shield. I wasn't just a stranger, I was an intruder. I was the ghost haunting my own family. Just as I was beginning to sink into this new, terrible reality, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly, melodic chime. It was a series of sharp, impatient presses, a sound that belonged in a New York high-rise lobby, not on a quiet Evanston afternoon. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I knew that impatient rhythm. Chloe looked up, her expression wary. I walked to the door and pulled it open, and the two halves of my life collided. It was Victoria. She stood on the porch, a picture of sleek, corporate power in a dark pantsuit and cutting-edge heels. Her face a mask of controlled fury. Her expensive perfume, a scent I associated with boardrooms and power plays, felt like a pollutant in the clean suburban air. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into the house. Her eyes scanned the lived-in comfort of the living room, the scattered toys, Chloe standing by the kitchen table, the two small children now peeking out from behind an armchair. Her perfectly sculpted lips curled into a sneer. "Playing house, Ethan. I've been calling you for 2 days. 2 days you've been completely dark. Did you really think you could just run back to your little housewife and forget everything?" "Victoria, this isn't the place," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I think it is the place," she snapped, her volume rising. Her gaze shot daggers at Chloe, then back at me. "I hope you haven't been feeding him any sentimental nonsense," she said to Chloe, completely ignoring her humanity. Then she rounded on me again. "You were supposed to be here for a day. Sign the papers, liquidate this dump, and get back to New York. Do you have any idea the kind of trouble we're in?" My mind went blank. Trouble? We were at the top of our game. "The quarterly reports are a disaster," she hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial rage. "The Phoenix project is bleeding us dry. The board is breathing down my neck. I was counting on you. I was counting on your fat inheritance to plug the holes, to keep us afloat." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "This whole thing, Ethan, us, your promotion, it was all contingent on a capital infusion. Your money was supposed to save the company." The words hung in the air, more shocking than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just a partnership. It wasn't a relationship born of mutual ambition. I wasn't her chosen successor. I was a bailout package. The life I chose, the career I sacrificed my family for, was all built on a foundation of lies and sinking stock prices. The promotion, the power, it was an illusion, a sinking ship she had lured me onto with false promises while she eyed my father's life savings. I stood there, utterly broken, as the final pillar of my self-delusion crumbled into dust. And across the room, Chloe watched it all unfold, her expression completely unreadable as the architecture of my terrible choice collapsed in on itself. Victoria's voice was like shattering glass on the quiet suburban lawn. Her perfectly manicured venom-laced words sliced through the calm afternoon air, but they felt distant, like a broadcast from another planet. All I could see, all I could process, was the way Chloe stood on the porch, one hand instinctively on the doorframe, ready to shield her children from the chaos I had brought to their doorstep. "So this is what you've been doing, playing house?" Victoria shrieked, her face a mask of fury. "I've been holding things together by a thread, waiting for you to come back with that fat inheritance. And you're here with her? Fat inheritance." The words hit me, not with the sting of an accusation, but with the cold, dead thud of a final diagnosis. The ambition that had been a raging fever in my blood for 5 years finally broke. In that single ugly moment, I saw it all for what it was. My career, my corner office, my relationship with this woman. It was all a house of cards, built on a foundation of greed, and the wind was finally starting to blow. The promotion she gave me, the life she offered, it was never about my talent. It was a down payment on my father's legacy. She was just as transactional as I had been, and our whole life together was a sinking ship she expected me to bail out. Chloe's expression was unreadable, a quiet observer to the train wreck of the life I had chosen over her. In her stillness, there was more power than in all of Victoria's screaming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a profound, hollowed-out exhaustion. I walked over to Victoria, took her by the elbow, a gesture that was neither gentle nor aggressive, merely final, and started walking her toward her rental car parked at the curb. "What are you doing? Get your hands off me, Ethan," she sputtered, trying to wrench her arm away. "It's over, Victoria," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I didn't look at her. I looked past her, at the peeling paint on my neighbor's fence, at a kid riding his bike down the block. I looked at the normal, real world I had willingly traded for a lie. "You can't do this," she hissed as I opened the driver's side door for her. "We have a business to save." "No," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "You have a business to save. I have nothing to do with that anymore." She stared at me, her furious expression slowly melting into disbelief, then a flicker of panic. For the first time she looked her age, scared and desperate. She got in the car without another word, slammed the door, and peeled away from the curb with a squeal of tires, leaving behind a silence that was more damning than any shouting match. I was finally, irrevocably free of the poison that had ruined my life. But freedom felt less like a victory and more like standing alone in the rubble of a city I had bombed myself. The next morning, I sat in the lawyer's office, the scent of old paper and leather polish filling the air. The same office where I had first swaggered in, determined to liquidate my past and cash out. Mr. Henderson, my father's old attorney, looked at me over his spectacles, his face a mixture of professional courtesy and guarded curiosity. "So, you've reviewed the documents," he said, gesturing to the thick pile on the mahogany desk between us. "It's all pretty straightforward." "I want to make a change," I said, my voice steady. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "A change?" I slid a piece of paper across the desk. A single page I'd written out last night after hours of staring at the ceiling. "I want to place the house and 95% of the liquid assets into an irrevocable trust." Mr. Henderson picked up the paper and read it. His eyebrows shot up. "An irrevocable trust for Leo and Mia?" He looked at me, truly confused. "With Chloe as the sole trustee? Ethan, that means you would have no access, no control. The money and property would belong to the children, managed by their mother. You'd be left with a very modest amount." "I know what it means," I said. "It's not my money. It never was. My father made that clear. I'm just making it legal. It was the only right thing to do. The house, the money. It was the security I had stolen from them. It was the roof over their heads, their college funds, the stability they deserved. It was the price of my monumental mistake, and it was a price I was finally willing to pay." Signing the documents an hour later felt like setting down a mountain I'd been carrying on my shoulders for 5 years. Each loop of the pen was an apology. Each signature was an act of surrender. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years, but also poorer in a way that had nothing to do with a bank account. I had just enough to get a cheap apartment somewhere quiet and find a boring job. Enough to start over. My bags were packed and sitting by the front door. I found Chloe on the porch swing, the same one where I'd first seen her with the twins. She watched me approach, her arms crossed, her guard still up. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and the promise of evening. I stood before her, my hands shoved in my pockets because I didn't know what else to do with them. "The lawyer will be in touch," I began, my voice a little rough. "It's all taken care of, the house, the portfolio. It's in a trust for them, for Leo and Mia." "You're the trustee." She just nodded slowly, her eyes searching my face for the angle, the catch. "There wasn't one. I know I can't erase what I did, Chloe," I said, the words feeling small and pathetic in the face of my betrayal. "And I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I lost the right to that a long time ago. I'm not asking to be your husband again, either." I paused, taking a breath. "I'm giving up my claim to the life I destroyed. It's yours. It was always meant to be yours." I let that hang in the air for a moment, before I got to the real reason I was standing there. The one selfish thing I had left to ask for. I need to ask. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. If one day, maybe, I might be allowed to be their father. The question hung between us, fragile and heavy. I expected a no. I deserved a no. She had every right to slam the door in my face forever and tell me to get lost. She looked away, toward the street where the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I saw the war in her expression, the years of pain fighting against some other, softer impulse. When she finally looked back at me, her eyes were clear. She didn't offer a smile or an embrace. She simply opened the door to a future I didn't deserve, but one I would spend the rest of my life trying to earn. "You can start by calling them next week," she said softly. "We'll see. We'll see." It was more than I could have ever hoped for. It was a single thread of possibility. I nodded, unable to speak, the lump in my throat too big to swallow. I picked up my bags, walked to my car, and didn't look back until I was a block away. I finally risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Through the big front window, I could see two small figures, Leo and Mia. They were standing on the sofa, watching me go. My journey 5 years ago was driven by a desperate, toxic ambition. This one was different. As I drove away from the only home that ever mattered, I felt no anger, no greed, no bitterness. For the first time, there was only the faint, fragile hope of redemption.